to our panel session for the conference. Welcome to Jude and to Richard. I haven't got to read out those big bios, just Jude and Rich. Okay?
Absolutely.
By now. All right, so we'll get straight in. Jude, first question to you. The material universe has shown to be fractal at all scales. Might consciousness itself, or even our perception, sensory experiencing of the world also be fractal? Could the multiverse be fractal-like?
Let me take a step back from that with the multiverse, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what we mean by multiverse. And the best cosmological understanding we have is that we don't know if there is a multiverse or not. It's likely because why not? And in an infinite and eternal cosmos, why wouldn't there be other universes as great thoughts within that infinite and eternal plenum of mind? So yes, there may be. We don't know that there are. I think the one idea that I do get very grumpy about is parallel universes. Because there may be other multiverses with different rules of principles of the laws of relationships. There may well be. There may have been other universes that predate ours, which I talked about on Friday night. We've got some reasonable evidence that is indeed the case. The problem with so-called parallel universes is that they came about as an idea on the basis that the exquisite fine-tuning and perfect interdependence of our universe, which has enabled its evolutionary arc from simplicity to complexity, couldn't happen unless there were almost an infinity of other universes, because our universe is random. So if our universe is random, because it couldn't be conscious, it couldn't be meaningful or purposeful, it could only be random. So if it's random, and it's exquisitely fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 27, 1 part in 1,000 trillion, it says that there must be at least another 1,000 trillion versions of our universe out there. And for me, that is so nonsensical, because it absolutely, first of all, there's absolutely no evidence for it. It obviates every rule of our universe, which is it is as simple as it can be, but no simpler, to undertake its journey of evolution. And so I do get very grumpy, and it's losing traction. It got a bit of traction in the 80s, 90s especially. It's like somebody's just putting in the waste bag of history at the moment, because it just doesn't help anybody. And if you think about it, it's incredibly disempowering, because we're back to randomness. We're back to no meaning, no purpose. Certainly we're not back to a conscious, theosophical universe, a universe that now, with everything that's been shown in the last 3 days, is now being supported by the best evidence we have. So I'd like to say that about multiverse. In terms of fractal, fractals, yes, they're basically, the point about a fractal is about a pattern that can scale up and scale down. Just as if you think about a triangle, if you think about a small triangle, you can grow that triangle to very large scales, but the relationships between its sides and its angles stay the same. So there's that sense of nested replicability and reflection. But when we're talking about our being fractal, Stuart Kaufman's very good research on this. He talks about systems of systems. So we're not a triangle, we're rather more complex than that. But nonetheless, the patterns of relationship that we find throughout the whole universe are fractal.
Okay, thank you. Would I just be able to point out here, everything that you've shared this weekend is evidence-based. Isn't that the case?
Absolutely. And the 2 books that I most recently wrote, The Cosmic Hologram in 2017, some of you are reading or have read, but you may not be aware that after that I wrote a book called The Story of Gaia in 2022, and both of those are Nautilus Prize winners. Cosmic Hologram, Silver, Story of Gaia, Gold, Nautilus. And they're absolutely full of evidence. And going back to what Donna was saying, a lot of the sort of evolutionary aspects I actually cover in the story of Gaia. If you go to wholeworld-view.org, which is on the back of the postcard,
which I was coming to, there is another one on the table.
But if you go to the website, you'll find a section on a whole around large reality with some glossaries, etc. But elsewhere on the website is a summary of the science. And we've got a whole raft of peer-reviewed papers on different fields of research, everything from meteorology and human systems and physics and chemistry and whatever, to evolutionary biology, and they're all supporting the same thing, which is what we've shared, and it's what HPB spoke of.
It's exactly what
she was speaking of. But now we have 125 years more evidence
to support
it.
She did say ultimately that science will be a great ally to theosophy. It's not that it's exactly the same, but as time goes forward, that will be its ally, that's its place. Quite interesting. Thank you, that's wonderful. It's interesting that these questions, there's theosophical questions and there's science questions. So this is very easy for me. Now, Richard, how can we promote theosophy to our communities through the branches?
Some theosophy can be promoted through the national section, and we try and do that as much as possible, but really communities are exactly that, communities local, and so it would be trying to get some outreach with people in the community. What does your branch feel like you want to do? Are you a branch that really is like science? Are you a branch that does artwork? Do you want animal welfare? Do you want to use perhaps something like the TOS? I know Carolyn Hamilton in the Waikato. What is it? Here to Care?
Here to Care
yeah,
charity.
And so that working with it was a local policeman with kids who are in trouble and things like that. They're in Waikato doing a huge amount of work with this. Now, that local community work is getting noticed, and people like judges are turning up. The people are coming to the Theosophical Centre. We've been asked to speak at universities, and so that's just organic growth. So it's really finding what the passion is. What do your members have a passion about? Some areas like to work in prisons, for example, and you often find, and you go, I didn't know this, but as someone in a branch, will be talking, they'll go, oh, we go into prisons and we work with prisoners and we help them with counselling or spiritual, we give them books and things like that, and sometimes they write to the branch or they write to headquarters and they're interested and want pamphlets around theosophy. So I think it's really finding what inspires you in the heart as a group, a collective, locally, and just build on that.
Thank you. Jude, did you want to add anything to that? I realise it's specifically theosophical branches, but we are speaking of communities in different areas.
Absolutely, and I wholeheartedly share what Richard said, that it goes back to this act local, I think, that we were talking about and exploring this morning. A few other thoughts for us is, I think it's a both and. It's actually what does the local branch want and what the community are calling for. But I also feel there's a great power in this room on a national scale of everyone coming together to say, what is it that we can share together that through this? I mean, one of you came forward to ask about the government and how could we, approach the government with this. Just as, I was saying I was working with the Wellbeing Alliance economy, who are coming from this unitive perspective and are working with the government of New Zealand. I can connect with them and connect them with you and see whether there's an opportunity to approach the government from this unitive perspective. And how then can that be brought forward in policies? Because if you bring a unitive perspective into your policies, they're very different from if you're not. And I know a lot of folks who are working in prisons. And again, a lot of the work that I'm doing on transnational, global scale, we can continue to talk about and say, how can it be applied here? You know, how can we link up and lift up together more effectively, more coherently, from a heart-centered perspective? So I think we're really opening the doors now to these possibilities.
Thanks, Jude. I think we're really talking about that communication field. One thing I will add when it says, how can we promote theosophy? You yourself are actually the best person wherever you are, and sometimes you don't ever even have to mention the word theosophy. That's by the by. You yourself is your actions and what you do. Not a lot of people know that HPB and Annie Besant, they opened a home for destitute women in 1891, the year HPB died. And there was a lot of work done around that. Well, not many people know that on a personal level, this is what they did, and they were known in their community in doing this. So I'll just add that little thing there. Thank you to you both. Jude, how can we embrace wholeness and awaken the human heart on a daily basis?
Well, I think Donna guided us on that, and I think the takeaways that Donna's so kindly provided us do that. And you know, it is simple. I mean, I thought they were beautiful, what you suggested for us. But just going back this morning into those, you know, appreciating that the big breath of the universe is flowing through us in every moment. So, you know, that might come at times of stress. It may come when we're feeling really busy. You know, there's a saying that when the times get urgent, slow down. Wiser words have not been spoken in my experience. And I think it's being open to doing that every day and realising that it's not for high days and holidays. It's better, in my experience, to be consciously either meditating, which Richard teaches, or those exercises that Donna has given us, or whatever feels right for you, to do it even if for a few minutes each day, but every day, rather than going, I'm too busy today, and then waiting for a week, and then the week goes by, and onward. Making it part of the gift you offer yourselves, I think, is really important. It's not something extra to do. It's like, and Tim was having a conversation with me earlier, it's how do we look after ourselves? It's about self-care. And when we can care for ourselves in that way, we can care more for others. So that's why I would suggest doing it and keeping it simple and keeping it light. And if it means dancing Queen every day.
Thank you. Richard, did you want to add anything?
Quickly, it's keeping it simple really. It's taking it things like back to nature. Getting up early, looking at the sunrise. When you hear the birds in the trees, actually listen to the birds, listen to the gurgling of the stream. Meditation is another one. Awareness, bringing our awareness to what we're doing, being in the present, living every moment. And one of the things I like to try and think of is, we always think of ourselves as this individual walking around, but think of ourselves, say, every day I'm a spiritual being, having a human experience, a physical experience. And if you thought about this room with a little golden light or thread connecting every single one of us in this web of golden light, and realise we're one. So this, we're sort of raised in schools to think of separateness and competition and those types of things. If we can flip our view around to think of what we're doing and saying we're doing to ourselves, and think of that golden thread of light from everybody's brown chakra.
Thank you. All right, next one. Now this one's actually quite long, so I'll read it out, and I'll start with Richard on this one because I noticed they're referring to a quote of yours and something that John spoke about, and then you can comment after that too. All right. I hope this doesn't sound too much like agony aunt question, and I apologise for the length of this question, but this really is a dilemma for me. We have talked about interbeing and interconnected, and John spoke about the need for self-reflection, while Richard spoke of Marcus Aurelius' statement of not allowing or seeing ourselves as being harmed. I'm thinking of a particular relationship in my past where I self-reflected and persevered in what was essentially quite an unhealthy connection until I nearly burst. But with no self-reflection in the other person and no willingness to change, in the end, I still had to let the relationship go and set boundaries on some very bad behaviour. My question is, how do we know within interbeing when our self-reflection and compassion actually turns into becoming an enabler for the continuation of bad behaviour? So there's that aspect to the question. And then, it is so painful to cut people off, but sometimes there seems to be no entry point for constructive co-creation. Can the panel please comment from their shared wisdom? Richard,
Well, that's a long question. I think I would probably make a starting point at understanding our values and our principles before we bring that other person into the picture. So, what do we believe is the way to live life? How do we want to live life? When we get to the end of life, will we say, I had a fine life, it was of value, it was of worthwhile? And so some of these values that we might live by, and we do have these in our Theosophical Society. We talk about things like respect, integrity, we talk about truth, we talk about goodwill, honour. These things mean something, and so if we're actually starting to live our life by these things, we will actually have the ability to set boundaries about what's acceptable or not. Now, we bring the other person into the picture. Each one of us is on a spiritual journey, and not everyone is at an equal stage in that journey, in the evolutionary ladder they talk about. So where we're at may not be where someone else is at, and their needs may be quite different to our needs. So whilst we have these loving relationships, at the end of the day, each and every one of us is responsible for our own behaviours, our own choices. Now, in the Mahatma letters, you find a lot of this sort of thing happening in advice. And even with the chelas, the disciples of the great ones won't step in and save you. They won't save a chela. They say you've got your own karma, and you know you need to face that. And they said if we actually stepped in and did something for you, which I'm sure they could, the karmic aspects are on them, not on the pupil. And so all whether it's good karma or bad karma goes to them. What have you learned? So I would say that maybe sometimes people come into our lives, it doesn't necessarily have to be for a lifetime. They might be coming in teaching us a lesson. Sometimes it's good easy lessons, sometimes it's strife. There will be lessons for that person, and there will be also lessons for us, because in those difficult situations we stop back and reflect, how did I handle that? How did I live through that difficult moment in my life, holding the values that I cherish and living up to those.
Thank you. Jude, would you like to further comment?
Yeah, well, thank you, Richard. I think that was a beautifully wise and compassionate response, and I'd agree with all of that. I think I work, I serve as a planetary healer, but for many years I also worked for people's psycho-spiritual healing. And what I realised over many years is the same patterns that we play out individually, we also play out in groups and collectively. And so we find not just one-on-one relationships playing out certain patterns, but we also find families playing out similar patterns and onwards. And so what I realised is that I work with 5 archetypal patterns, which are also in the Bible, of abandonment, abuse, betrayal, denial and rejection. And they're like the archetypal patterns that play out. So when we're in a relationship, we're playing out the patterns that are within us at an emotional level, mental level, along our journey. And there's a universal principle of reflectivity, which says that those relationships will reflect back on us. So it is, again, it's the within and without. So if we're in a relationship that is, unhealthy, if we're feeling uncomfortable, unhealthy, hurt, whatever, my suggestion is to sort of say, what is it within us that principle of reflection is showing? What is the pattern within me that's playing out? And if I continue that pattern and in that relationship, guess what? The pattern will continue and in that relationship. And if I leave that relationship, which, for my own sense of well-being, I may need to, if I've still got that pattern playing out with me, then I'll find another relationship to continue playing it out. So it is this, as you say, Richard, it is this journey, and the more we're aware of seeing that and reflecting back to us, and taking our own journeys of inner healing onwards, the less we're likely to be in those codependent relationships, because our spiritual journey doesn't require them anymore, and there isn't that sort of, that reflectivity that's playing out in them. And I do agree we can get to a point where if we stay in a relationship that is that codependent and unhealthy, we're essentially colluding with that behaviour, both within ourselves and that other person. There's no easy answer to any of this, it's called being human. But I do feel that, those sort of ways of being aware of it helps us to move on and grow. And the other thing I'd like to really double down on what you said is we can't rescue anyone else, and we can only make the choices ultimately for ourselves. So I think with those in mind and heart, I think that's
great. Thanks, Jude. I'm not going to comment on that one. You two have done brilliant. Okay. Jude, please explain. All time is happening now. Scientific proof, question mark. Does this relate to the Akashic records, question mark?
Okay, don't get me started. Within space-time, all time is not happening at the same time. Otherwise we would not be able to say we have a universe that began 14 billion years ago in its simplest, most minute state, and ever since then, as space expanded, as time has literally flowed forward from past to present, unfolding the future. That enables both the arrow of time and the her story of the universe, but it also enables within space-time principles of causality, principles of relationship that could not occur if all time was happening within space-time. However, and this is the both and of what I was sharing the other night, is that because our universe exists and evolves as a unitive entity, as a non-locally unified entity, it knows itself at every moment. And therefore that's why we can naturally have supernormal attributes, such as the ones that Donna was talking about. That's why we can have that non-local intuition, because we're naturally connecting with the innate non-local unity, wholeness, oneness of our universe. So, and in multidimensional realms that are beyond space-time, that transcend space-time, the experience of those realms, from my own experience, is a very different sense of time. But I would really say, please, time is a wonderful thing, but if we don't understand that it has a flow, and the reason it flows is that point around what I was saying about the informational content. Our universe could not evolve without the flow of time, being something real within space-time, because it's at every moment, from the beginning to now, and then unfolding into the potential of the future, and all of the additional information that's expressed and experienced at all levels. That could not happen without the flow of time within space-time.
Thank you. All right. It is one thing, Richard, it is one thing to speak of being good, moral and courageous. How do you practice this in your life, and how do you encourage others to? Don't get him started.
Your wife is here.
She said. Again, it goes back to the solid foundation of what you honestly believe in. So, for example, Buddha talked about cessation of suffering and leading to liberation with the Four Truths, and now that led on to the Eightfold Noble Path. One of the first parts of that is right view or right thinking. So you've got to sit down there for quite some time and think, what is the right view? What's the right view on life and how to live life? So there's a whole enormous discovery to get out just on that one point. But then he goes on and he talks about right speech and right action. One of the purest and easiest forms I've found personally is the Golden Stairs by Madame Blavatsky. As she talks about a clean life, a pure heart, an eager intellect, an unspoiled spirituality, perception. Now, it goes on about brotherliness and sisterliness. It talks about your teacher and the disciple. It talks about a courageous endurance of personal injustice, a brave declaration of principles, a valiant defence of those who are unjustly attacked. So each line in this is pure gold, and you can study these things. So after many years, for me personally, I've spent many years trying to study and thinking, how do I want to live my life, to get this sort of platform of how I believe life should be rightly lived, for me, not for others, for me. The problem is when, and I'm sure everyone agrees with it, the problem is when it comes to the rubber hits the road and you're personally going to cop it. You know, at work, you could lose your job, you could lose your friends, you could lose a loved one. It takes courage to sit there and say, I will still go with my principles, and I know in advance something is going to happen in this instance, something bad. And this has happened to me many times in my life, and I've known in advance what the consequences, but I have still done what I consider to be the right thing, integrity. And in my presentation the other day, I talked about opinion of others. You see, we put too much store into the opinion of the crowd and gossip and all these things. If we do that, we truly are like seaweed floating around no matter what happens. It's an unsatisfying life to live that way. And so probably there's a couple of other things I'd like to mention. So attachment, we attach to our ideas, we attach to outcomes, we want things to work the way we want, and when it doesn't we get really upset and we react. So we've got to look at some of these things. Personally, I often, in a difficult, tricky situation, I think, what would the masters of the wisdom do? How would they act? What would their response be, knowing what I know from books and other things? And I try and align with that. I also think when people in hospitals and at the end of their life they are dying and they'll go, oh, I have regrets. I wish I'd done spoken to my kids more, my family. I wish I'd done this, that and the other thing. Wish I had a second chance. So I sometimes think, well, what if that was me? And then all of a sudden you grant yourself the wish of time travel, and you time travel right back to this present moment, and you go, I grant you your second chance. Do it differently. Make yourself proud. Make the masters of the wisdom proud. Make your family or whoever you love proud, but mostly to your inner self that you've done and lived the way you think. And so it does take courage, but in that little short story I mentioned, courage is a habit as well.
Thank you, thank you. Jude, do you want to add anything to that?
Only very briefly, because again I wholeheartedly agree with Richard on this one. My mum, when I was that high, taught me a life lesson. She said, Jude, do the right thing, whatever it costs. And I think that's what you're saying. And for me, trying always to do the right thing, whatever it costs, I came to even simplify what is right. And I came to a view for myself that it was to choose love. To always choose love. Because sometimes, as you say, Richard, you get in a situation where choosing the right thing can be very fearful. Because you lose your job, and I've had those circumstances as well. Yeah, that's right, yeah. I've been on the naughty step many times for that reason. But by really simplify it to the essence of choosing love, and it goes back to what you were saying about the heart's wisdom. When we choose love, it's our heart saying, this is the right thing. Whatever our head tells us, our heart knows better, really.
Thanks, Jude, and thanks, Richard. I can attest that Richard is very brave. I can attest to that and courage.
Tony's very brave as well, marrying me, so that's courage.
Actually, what's quite interesting is when we're young, we don't always know. It's not that we don't know the values, but we don't necessarily have done our spiritual search and everything, and we marry someone and off we go, and our lessons come after we've made certain choices. So I always find that quite interesting as well. So we choose what we come to work with. So I think it's quite interesting, and we're all developing different qualities and values and things like that. So we have lots of opportunities for that. But on that note, I would like to thank both my panelists. That was really lovely. I felt like I had two very people sitting strong in their integrity and their wisdom for both humanity and for planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you.